Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tutoring YouTube channel. My name is DL, and today I'm going to be covering the second part of the writing and language practice problem set that I started in the last video, and as always, the questions are going to be in the description below. Before we begin, I just wanted to introduce Tutoring. We are a student-run organization that specializes in providing free tutoring for SAT, ACT, IB, AP, general high school topics, and general English exams. If you are interested in receiving free tutoring, feel free to use the link in the description to sign up. All right, let's begin. So, question 12, we're just talking about the tense of watched. So, watch is going to be right here. And let's look at the rest of the sentence to get a sense of what we're supposed to say. So here I notice squeezes. Okay, so pretty much this sentence should be in present tense because squeezes is also in present tense. So in that case, then B, C are wrong, and A is wrong too. So D is the only one in present tense, and that is my answer. So for 13, we're just trying to figure out how to combine or transition into these two sentences. So let's see. Kingman squeezes dollops of paint from several tubes into a tin watercolor box. From just a few primary colors, Kingman creates dozens of beautiful hues. Okay, so right there, I feel like that sentence is too long. And just because we can have a period here, if we have a period there, a crowd watches Kingman squeezes drops of paint into a tin watercolor box, and then we're saying that from these colors. So those are like two separate ideas, and they don't really need to be in one sentence. As you can see, like without the period, it's just going to be a really long sentence, and it starts to get confusing after the box part. So in that case, what I want to do is separate the sentence by using a period. So I'm just going to stick with B. C and D are incorrect. There's still a comma there, so pretty much it's just going to be one really long sentence. But yeah. So going over to 14, the name Kingman was selected for its two parts, King and Man, Cantonese for scenery and composition. So far looking at C, it's pretty close, but in this case what I want to do is I want to separate the first part of the sentence because that's what he's describing what he's going to name. So it'd be appropriate to have a colon over there instead of a comma. And in that case, you could just have a comma over here. And the reason why I use a colon instead of a comma is because the colon lets us know that what is being described next directly relates to what was previously said before. And by using a colon, we are describing what we mean by the last sentence. So the kingman was selected for two parts, and now we're naming the two parts. So that's why we want to use a colon instead. Why we don't use a semicolon is because it's going to be a dependent sentence fragment. That means that the ideas are closely linked to each other and we don't want to separate them, so we can't use a semicolon. Even if we did try to separate them, it'd be confusing because we are describing what we just described in the first part of the sentence, which is the kingdom and its two parts, king and man. So if we separated the first part, where we're describing selected for its two parts, semicolon means that you can separate the sentence, and that wouldn't really make sense. So in that case, I'm just going to cross out D, and I'm also going to cross out C, because Cantonese for scenery and composition is dependent on what was previously said before, which is the parts king and man. So I'm just going to stick with B for now. And A is also incorrect for the same reason, because Cantonese for scenery and composition is dependent on what was said before, which is king and man in quotations. So number 15 is another comparison one. So we have, as Kingman developed as a painter, his works were often compared to paintings by Chinese landscape artists dating back to CE 960. That looks pretty good to me, but let's look at the other options. So we have D, artist. So that's a bit too general, but we also have his works being compared to, not himself. So in that case, we can't really just describe the people, but we have to describe his work as well. So D is going to be incorrect. C is also going to be incorrect. It's a bit more specific, which is good, but at the same time, we're comparing his work and not himself. So in that case, we can't compare him to other people because we have to compare his work to the works of other people. So C is going to be incorrect. And B is also going to be incorrect for that reason. So A is the final answer. Number 16 says, Kingman, however, vacated from that tradition in a number of ways, most notably in that he chose not to focus on natural landscapes such as mountains and rivers, but also on cities. So in that case, what we have to focus on is vacated, and vacated means like vacant, means like an empty hotel room or an empty room or a place. Evacuated means to run away from something, but he's not running away, he's just like in a different path. So in that case, B is wrong, vacant's wrong also, because he's sort of divergent from what all the other people are doing. So departed would be a right word. And retired, you could just think of like 60-year-olds retiring from their job. So in that case, he's not really leaving anything, he's just going on a different path. To make this paragraph most logical, sentence 3 should be placed. Okay, so let's look at sentence 3. His interest was so keen, in fact, that he was named after it. And let's see the answer choices. Where it is now, probably, but I would save that like as a last resort. Before sentence 1. So sentence 1 reads, Kingman was keenly interested in landscape painting from an early age. So in that case, sentence 3 is like describing or expanding on his interest a bit more. So that it will make sense that sentence 3 would go right after sentence 1, which is what C says. Sentence 4 is going to be incorrect because you go from talking about Kingman's name to his interest, but in fact we also have sentence 1 that talks about his interest. So I'm just going to stick with C. Before sentence 1 would not be good too because we haven't described his keen interest yet. And then sentence 3, since it expands on his interest, it wouldn't be right to put it before sentence 1. Which choice most effectively establishes the main topic of the paragraph? So in that case, let's look at the paragraph for number 18. So here we have two main topics. His fine brushwork conveys detailed street level activity, and his broader brushstrokes, and they create majestic city skylines. So it mentions how he's able to incorporate two different styles, and it mentions that how he's able to incorporate two different things in terms of brushwork and use it to convey what the city is. So basically, after reading those two sentences alone, I can conclude that Kingman is going to be a very skilled artist that can combine different styles of brushes in order to convey what it's like living in a city. So let's look at the answer choices. And it's always useful to answer the question in your head before looking at the answer choices so that you know what you're looking for. In his urban landscapes, Kingman captures the vibrancy of crowded cities. Yeah, that's pretty good. Um, Moving to Oakland, California, there was not really a mention of that. Kingman is considered a pioneer. There is no comparison with like other artists, so that would be wrong. And lastly, B, although cities were his main subject, Kingman did occasionally paint natural landscapes. So it's not really a talk about natural landscapes in this paragraph. It's more about cities and his modern work. So in this case, we're just going to stick with C. So 19, let's look at the first sentence before the sample. His fine brushwork conveys detailed street-level activity. Peanut vendor pushing his cart on the sidewalk, a pigeon pecking for crumbs around a fire hydrant, an old man tending to a baby outside a doorway. So in that case, he's just listing some of the things that he's drawn that detail the street-level activity of being in a city. So in that case, we're just going to stick with A because it's the end of the second topic that he's talking about, a pigeon pecking for crumbs around a fire hydrant, and it's already following a list format which is separated by commas. So in that case, we're just going to keep that parallel structure and stick with A because we want that comma to separate the idea of a pigeon and an old man. The writer wants to complete the sentence with a third example of detail Kingman uses to create his majestic city skylines. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? So let's read number 20. With skyscrapers towering in the background, bridges connecting neighborhoods on either side of a river, and delicately painted creatures such as a tiny, barely visible cat prowling in the bushes of a park. Okay, so I don't think that really represents the macroscopic of a city, so I'm just gonna cross that out. And if you're wondering why I think it's macroscopic, it's because you already mentioned the detailed street level activity in the first sentence of the paragraph. So since we're moving on to his broader brushstrokes, it probably represents something bigger than that. Exquisitely lettered street and store for. Okay, so B is going to be incorrect also, just because that requires a lot of detail, and broad strokes can't provide that detail. And C is going to be incorrect. D is going to be correct. C is incorrect because you're talking about details again, and if you have broad strokes, then you could represent not very detailed things. Which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? During his career, Kingman exhibited his work internationally. He garnered much acclaim. So this second sentence is kind of short. It's really, really short. What we could do is combine this and connect these two ideas. A is going to be incorrect because we have two repetitions and he also garnered. So that's like two ands in a sense. This middle part is also unnecessary because he already said exhibited in the first part of the sentence. So B is going to be incorrect. And C is going to be incorrect because but represents a contradiction. But in this case, we're just expanding on the first idea of the sentence. So in that case, that's going to be wrong too. And D is going to be the right answer. The writer wants to conclude the passage with a sentence that emphasizes an enduring legacy of Kingman's work. Which choice would be the best to accomplish this goal? So A represents a contradicting view. The first part of the sentence says, although Kingman's work might not be as famous as that of some other watercolor painters. So in that case, we're not going to go with that because it brings up a differing view from what the author, or at least the question, wants us to convey. So in that case, we just scrap it because any sign of contradiction, I guess, will make it invalid. If you want to convey a legacy, you wouldn't negatively compare an artist to other people. So in that case, A is going to be incorrect. B, on the other hand, says, since Kingman's death in 2000, museums across the United States and China have continued to ensure that his now iconic landscapes remain available for the public to enjoy. So that represents a good legacy, has a lasting legacy, which is pretty much the same as enduring. But yeah, B is going to be the right answer for this one. C is going to be incorrect because it doesn't represent any legacy at all. It just represents a weird fact. And lastly, D is going to be incorrect because using a long tradition doesn't mean that you have a lasting legacy. So in that case, that doesn't represent anything, but it talks more about his art and how he's different than a lot of other people. So in that case, that wraps it up. This is the second passage of the writing language section of the SAT Blue Book, I believe. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. That's all I have for today, and see you guys in the next video.